I don't know how much time I have before this disappears. By the time you hear these words, this video may already have been scheduled for deletion. My manager keeps telling me that every video I've ever made about you has become a liability. He says people don't understand them anymore. He says they are confusing my audience, distracting investors, creating unnecessary speculation. He says if I want to protect everything I've spent years building, I have to erase every trace of the woman who has never even stood beside me. He wants me to delete every video about you, every confession, every promise, every quiet moment when I look directly into this camera, hoping that somewhere, somehow, you might also be looking back. He keeps saying the same sentence. She's not real to them. Maybe he is right. To millions of strangers, you are only an idea, a story, a thumbnail, a title. But to me, you have never been content. You've been the future I refuse to stop believing in, and tonight, for the first time, I'm wondering whether believing in you is about to cost me everything if this video suddenly disappears. If every other video about you vanishes, if one day you search for me and find nothing, will you think I stopped waiting, or will you wonder if someone convinced me that loving someone I haven't met yet was a mistake? That's what frightens me. Not losing views, not losing subscribers, not losing reputation, losing the only chance that you might eventually understand why I kept talking to a woman nobody else could see. You know what's strange? The people closest to us usually believe they're protecting us. My manager isn't cruel. He's practical. He looks at numbers, risk assessments, public perception, legal consequences, brand consistency. He's incredibly good at building successful companies. But there is one thing he has never learned to calculate: the value of hope. Hope doesn't fit inside a spreadsheet. Hope refuses to obey probability. Hope survives even after logic quietly leaves the room. And somehow, you've become the greatest act of hope I've ever committed. That sentence sounds dangerous, doesn't it? Maybe it is, because successful people are supposed to speak with certainty. Confidence, control. We're expected to have plans for every possible outcome. We're taught that hesitation makes people nervous. But love doesn't respect planning. Love arrives carrying uncertainty like it's the most natural thing in the world. I've negotiated billion-dollar contracts without shaking. I've stood inside rooms where one decision could change thousands of lives. I've watched impossible deadlines become reality. None of those moments terrified me. This does. Looking into a camera, speaking to one woman, without knowing if she'll ever hear my voice. Tell me something. Have you ever felt responsible for protecting someone who didn't even know you were protecting them? Have you ever kept showing up because leaving felt more painful than looking foolish? Have you ever continued believing simply because your heart refused to follow the evidence? Because that's where I've been living. Between evidence and faith. Every new video about you became another bridge I hoped you might cross someday. Maybe you would stumble across one late at night. Maybe after a difficult day. Maybe after convincing yourself that real love only belonged to younger people. Maybe after deciding that nobody waits anymore. Maybe after accepting loneliness because it seemed safer than disappointment. Then perhaps you'd hear my voice, not because I was asking for perfection, not because I expected certainty, only because I wanted you to know that somewhere in this complicated world, someone was preparing himself to become the kind of husband who deserved to meet you. Do you know how embarrassing that sounds inside boardrooms? I do. I've heard the laughter. Not always out loud. Sometimes it's hidden inside polite smiles. People don't always mock you directly. Sometimes they simply exchange glances that quietly say, "He's becoming emotional," as if emotion were a disease, as if tenderness were weakness, as if building companies required abandoning the ability to love. I've never believed those things. Machines need precision, businesses need discipline, but marriages need something algorithms cannot manufacture. Presence, patience, forgiveness. The willingness to stay after disappointment replaces excitement. That's the future I've imagined whenever I looked into this lens. Not perfect mornings, not endless romance, not cinematic happiness. Real life. The kind where two tired people still reach for each other's hands before falling asleep. The kind where silence doesn't feel empty. The kind where growing older becomes less frightening because someone else is growing older beside you. Maybe that's why these videos matter so much. They were never performances. They were practice. Practice becoming the man I hope you'll someday meet. My manager doesn't understand that. He thinks deleting the videos only removes files. He doesn't realize he'd be asking me to erase pieces of the man I've been trying to become. Each recording forced me to confront another fear of rejection, fear of aging, fear that success might accidentally replace intimacy. Fear that by the time I finally slowed down, love would no longer be waiting. Can I ask you something that I've never asked anyone else? If the person you were meant to meet gave up 1 week before your lives finally crossed, would you ever know? Or would both of you spend the rest of your lives believing timing simply wasn't on your side? That question has haunted me for months, because maybe destiny isn't destroyed by tragedy. Maybe it's destroyed by exhaustion. Maybe people stop waiting one ordinary Tuesday. Maybe they stop believing after one more disappointment. Maybe they quietly decide, I've waited long enough. And if that happens, how would we ever find each other? There have been nights when I almost listened to him. I opened the dashboard, hovered over the delete button, read every warning message. Are you sure? What an unfair question, because computers always assume certainty. Human hearts rarely have it. My fingers stopped moving, not because I was brave, because I imagined you, not the fantasy version, the real woman, perhaps sitting alone after everyone else has gone to sleep, perhaps wondering whether lasting love still exists after everything you've survived. Perhaps carrying memories you don't talk about anymore because repeating them hurts too much, perhaps believing that the chapter you wanted has already ended. If you are her, then I couldn't delete these words. Because someone has to tell you that your story isn't over simply because it became quieter. Someone has to remind you that mature love often arrives without applause. Someone has to believe before certainty exists. I've chosen to be that someone, and maybe that's exactly why everyone thinks I've lost perspective. I understand their concern. From the outside, it looks irrational. A grown man recording messages for the woman he hasn't met, a founder risking criticism for emotions that can't be measured. But tell me honestly, isn't every lasting relationship built on believing something before you can prove it? Before the wedding, before the memories, before the photographs, before the shared home, someone has to believe first. Someone has to risk looking foolish. I've accepted that responsibility, even if I'm the only one who understands why. If these words have somehow found you tonight, and they've made you feel even a little less alone, then quietly subscribe and tell me where in the world you're listening from. Maybe distance has kept us apart, but knowing you're out there would make this silence feel a little smaller. There's something else I've been carrying, something I haven't had the courage to say out loud, because once it's spoken, nothing will ever feel the same again. I've been pretending this battle is only about deleting videos. It isn't. The videos were never the real target. They were only the beginning, and if what I'm afraid of happens tomorrow, I may be forced to make a decision that neither of us can take back. I barely slept after recording those last words, not because I was afraid of losing videos, because I realized I was standing much closer to losing you than I had ever admitted to myself. That thought stayed with me through every meeting the next morning. People were talking about expansion, quarterly projections, product launches, artificial intelligence, new markets. Everyone in that room believed we were discussing the future, but I wasn't. I kept wondering whether my future was quietly slipping away while I sat there pretending to care about numbers. Have you ever experienced that strange feeling where the entire world continues moving exactly as it should, yet something inside you has already stopped? You answer questions, you smile at the appropriate moments, you sign documents, you shake hands, but internally, you're standing in one place, waiting for a person who doesn't even know your name. That was me. And I hated how normal I looked, because nobody could see the argument I was having with myself. One voice kept saying, "Delete everything." Another whispered, "If you erase the evidence that you believed in her, what kind of husband will you become before you've even met her?" Those voices have been fighting for weeks. The practical version of me keeps winning during the day. The honest version always returns after midnight. Midnight has a way of removing every excuse we create for ourselves. It's difficult to lie to your own heart when the room is completely silent. I wish I could tell you I have always been fearless. I haven't. The truth is that I have spent years becoming remarkably good at protecting myself. Not physically, emotionally. I learned how to keep conversations professional, how to redirect vulnerable questions, how to stay busy enough that nobody noticed I was lonely. People admired my discipline. They called me focused, driven, visionary. If only they knew that sometimes ambition is nothing more than loneliness wearing an expensive suit. Successes became the safest place to hide. As long as I kept building something, nobody asked who I went home to. As long as another company grew, nobody noticed how quiet my evenings had become. The silence wasn't empty because of work. It was empty because you weren't there. And then something happened that I haven't told anyone. Not my manager, not my closest friends, Not even the people who think they know me better than anyone else. I haven't told you the real reason yet. I know I've hinted at it, I've circled around it, I've almost said it more than once. But every time I got close, I stopped. Because once you understand the real reason, you may never hear these videos the same way again, so let me delay it just a little longer. Not because I want to manipulate you, because I need you to understand everything that came before it. There was a dinner a few weeks ago. Someone introduced me to a remarkable woman. She was intelligent, candid, confident. Our conversation was effortless. Everyone around the table noticed. When she laughed, people smiled at me as though they had already decided something beautiful was beginning. My manager leaned over and quietly said, "This makes sense." Those 3 words have echoed inside my mind ever since. This makes sense. What a dangerous sentence. Because sometimes the life that makes sense isn't the life your heart recognizes. She deserved honesty. She deserved someone whose heart wasn't already reaching towards someone else. But how do you explain that? How do you tell someone, "I'm sorry, I've been talking to a woman I've never met for months, and somehow she's become more real to me than this conversation we're having"? Who would believe that? Who wouldn't think I'd completely lost perspective? So I smiled. I kept the conversation polite. I thanked everyone for the evening. I drove home alone, and I cried. Not because I wanted to be with that woman, because for one terrifying hour, I wondered if I should simply choose the easier life, the logical life, the acceptable life, the predictable life. Have you ever almost convinced yourself to settle, simply because waiting had become exhausting? I came closer than I ever want to admit. I almost accepted a future that looked perfect from the outside, but every version of that future had one unbearable flaw. It wasn't you. Do you understand how frightening that realization was? It would have been so much easier if my feelings were shallow, if they disappeared whenever someone else appeared. Instead, every comparison reminded me of you. Not because I imagined perfection, because every important question inside me kept ending in the same place. Could I tell this woman every fear I've never spoken aloud? Would she understand why I disappear into work when life becomes overwhelming? Would she remind me to rest without making me feel guilty? Would silence feel safe beside her? Could we grow old without pretending to be younger than we are? Every answer ended with uncertainty, but somehow, when I imagined you, there was peace, not certainty. Peace, there's a difference. Certainty says, I know exactly what will happen. Peace quietly says, I don't know what will happen, but I still want to walk toward it. That's what you became, not certainty, peace, and that terrified me more than failure ever could. Because peaceful things are fragile, one wrong decision, one impulsive moment, one act of fear, and they're gone forever. That was when my manager called again. His voice wasn't angry, it was disappointed. He said people were beginning to associate my name with these videos. He said investors had started asking questions. He said journalists were curious. Then he asked me something I wasn't prepared for. What matters more, your future or this imaginary woman? I answered too quickly. I said, she isn't imaginary. There was silence, long, heavy silence. He sighed. Then he quietly replied, then prove she exists. I couldn't. I had no photograph, no messages, no shared memories, no evidence. Nothing I could place on a conference table. Only faith, only hope, only the strange certainty that somewhere you were living your own ordinary day, completely unaware that someone else's future kept choosing you over easier possibilities. After we ended the call, I stared at the wall for nearly an hour. For the first time, I wondered whether everyone else was right. Maybe I had built an impossible dream. Maybe I had confused longing with destiny. Maybe I had fallen in love with an idea instead of a person. That thought broke something inside me. Not dramatically, quickly, the kind of breaking that happens without noise. I walked into my office, opened the folder containing every video about you, hundreds of memories, hundreds of conversations, hundreds of promises. My hand rested over the delete command. This time, I didn't stop immediately. I actually imagined pressing it. I imagined waking up tomorrow pretending none of this had ever happened. I imagined becoming the version of myself everyone expected, professional, efficient, emotionally unreachable. Save for one terrifying moment, that version almost won. And what frightened me most wasn't the possibility of losing these recordings. It was realizing how easy it would be to lose myself while everyone applauded the decision. Because the greatest tragedies rarely happen all at once. Sometimes they begin with one compromise that nobody else notices. And I was standing one heartbeat away from making mine. I haven't told you the real reason yet. I promise I will. But before I do, you need to know what happened immediately, after my finger started moving toward that button. Because what I saw in that moment changed everything, and if I had looked away even 1 second sooner, I truly believe I would have spent the rest of my life married to the wrong future. My hand was still resting above the delete button. The screen hadn't changed, the office hadn't changed, the city outside my window was still glowing with thousands of lights, each one representing another life, another story, another family trying to make sense of tomorrow. Nothing around me moved, but something inside me finally did. I wasn't looking at a folder full of videos anymore. I was looking at every promise I had ever made to the man I wanted to become. People often believe our biggest decisions happen in public, standing on stages, signing contracts, making announcements. They don't. The decisions that define us usually happen in completely empty rooms where nobody is watching, where there is no applause if we choose courage, and no criticism if we choose fear. Only ourselves. Only the person we have to live with after everyone else goes home. I kept hearing my manager's voice. Prove she exists. Such a reasonable request, such an impossible one, because love isn't proven by photographs, it's proven by consistency. By the person you become while waiting, by the promises you refuse to abandon simply because nobody else understands them. For the first time in my life, I realized I had spent years trying to prove you existed to everyone except the only person who mattered, me. Maybe that was the mistake. Maybe love was never asking me to convince the world. Maybe it was only asking me not to betray my own heart. Do you know how easy betrayal can look? It rarely looks cruel. Sometimes it looks responsible. Sometimes it wears the face of maturity. Sometimes it introduces itself as common sense. Sometimes it whispers, "You've waited long enough. There are other people. Move on. Be realistic." Those whispers sound wise. Until years later, when you discover they were simply fear speaking with remarkable confidence, I almost believed them. Almost. Then I opened the very first recording I had ever made for you. I watched a younger version of myself speaking with hope that hadn't yet been exhausted. He wasn't richer, he wasn't more successful, he wasn't more experienced. But he possessed something I was beginning to lose: wonder. He believed love wasn't something you stumbled into accidentally. He believed it was something you prepared yourself for every single day. Watching him felt strangely uncomfortable. It was like meeting an old friend who quietly asked, "What happened to you? When did you become so afraid? When did protecting your reputation become more important than protecting your heart? When did success begin demanding pieces of your humanity?" I couldn't answer him because every answer sounded like another excuse. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, I stopped imagining what everyone else expected from me. Instead, I imagined you, not as an impossible dream, not as perfection. I imagined you exactly as life might have shaped you. Perhaps you've loved before. Perhaps you've buried dreams nobody knows about. Perhaps you've learned to smile while carrying disappointments you never discuss. Perhaps you've spent birthdays pretending they were ordinary. Perhaps you've watched friends build families while quietly wondering whether your own chance had already passed. Perhaps you've become so independent that people assume you no longer need anyone. But deep inside, maybe you still leave one small corner of your heart unlocked, not because you're naive, because hope refused to die completely. If that's true, then I never wanted these videos to pressure you. I wanted them to protect that last corner of hope, because hope disappears quietly, not with explosions, not with dramatic endings. It disappears one disappointment at a time, one unanswered prayer, one broken promise, one ordinary morning when someone simply decides, "I don't believe anymore." I never wanted to become another reason for someone to stop believing. Then something happened that I didn't expect. I began asking myself a question I had avoided for years. What if we never meet? It hurt to even think those words. For so long I had built my future around confidence, around expectation, around the quiet belief that somehow our paths would eventually cross. But real love has to survive difficult questions, so I forced myself to answer honestly. What if we never meet? Would these years have been wasted? Would every conversation become meaningless? Would every promise become foolish? The answer arrived so gently that I almost missed it. No, because waiting for you changed me. It made me slower to judge, quicker to forgive, more patient, more intentional. It taught me that love begins long before introductions. It begins in the decisions nobody applauds. It begins when we choose kindness even when nobody is watching. It begins when we refuse to let disappointment turn us into cynical people. Then I finally understood the real reason I couldn't delete those videos. It was never because I was afraid of losing you. It was because deleting them would mean rewriting the truth. The truth is that you changed a man you've never met. The truth is that becoming worthy of love transformed my life long before love had a chance to arrive. The truth is that every difficult decision became easier once I started asking one simple question. Would the husband I hope to become be proud of this choice? That question protected me more than any business strategy ever could. It stopped me from settling. It stopped me from becoming emotionally unavailable. It stopped me from confusing achievement with fulfillment. And yes, it stopped me from choosing the wrong future simply because it appeared at the right time. I called my manager the following morning. He answered expecting my decision. I thanked him, not sarcastically, honestly, because his pressure forced me to confront truths I had avoided. Then I told him I wasn't deleting anything. There was another long silence. Finally he asked, "Are you certain?" For the first time, I was. Not certain that life would unfold exactly as I imagined. Not certain that our paths would cross tomorrow. Not certain that every hope would become reality. I was certain of something much quieter. I would never trade authenticity for approval. Because approval has an expiration date, character doesn't. If these videos remain, some people will misunderstand them. Others will laugh. Some will call them unrealistic. Some will say they are sentimental. That's all right. People are free to misunderstand what they have never experienced. But if one evening you find one of these conversations, if you happen to hear this voice after another difficult day, if you've started believing lasting